The music is especially tender today, isn't it? Which is good because I'm verging into a subject this month, along with my colleague Matthew Cockram, having to do with the spirituality of adult life. And one of the key elements that goes with that is intimacy. First, I need to say, I hope you, Mandy, you'll get along with my proffering the saints from the pulpit. She's wearing her Colts jersey, by the way. It's nothing between you and me. You understand that. Yeah. You want to stay in right relationship with people who have the wrong football team in mind, but that's another matter. I chose this title because it's one of the first titles I ever used for a sermon now 30 more years ago. It came from a book at the time, one of those books that's supposed to help married people out. It was called Intimate Strangers, How to Relate to Your Spouse Better. I was newly married. We were all reading those things then. Now there's a couple of movies by that name. One of them has got a lot of gore in it, so I don't mean that. I really don't. But the paradox inherent in the title is where I want to go, the idea of intimacy and strangers. It's like that Alleluia we heard that was so quiet and yet so rejoicing. When two seeming opposites come together, something intriguing awaits. At least I hope. Like I said, I think that where we're going in this next month or two, for those who haven't been dropping by in the fall, is that Matthew and I are surveying the lifespan of a typical lifespan, that is to say childhood, youth, adulthood, age, and eldership. Not to talk about them morally or psychologically, but to talk about them spiritually, the values, the challenges, the insight that's available, and the struggles that are always present. And here in February, we're going to take a little bit of time talking about it from the relational point of view. Now, I could use a lot of psychologists here, but honestly, where I want to start is with Hinduism. In ancient Hinduism, there is something called the ashrama, your stage of life. And in the idealized life they had of 100 years, you spent 25 years each being a student, a householder, an elder, and a monk. I want you to notice that in our youth-driven culture in ancient Hinduism, it was understood that you spent half of your life being old, and that was important that you do it in two separate stages. But where we're going to be in February and March is that householder section, as Hinduism calls it, the time when you're relating to other people as an adult and taking on responsibilities as an adult, as a peer, sometimes as a manager of others, and the challenges and questions these bring forth. And the place I want to start in the few minutes I have is to ask you to think back to a moment when you were younger, that could be a few years or a lot of years, when you realized you were actually growing up. Now, there's puberty, of course, but I'm talking about when you realized you were doing things in a way that were more adult-like. In my generation, perhaps younger, when they allowed you to drive was a sure signal you were headed toward adulthood. And that's why kids like to get their driver's licenses. It gives them a sense of, I'm a pretty grown-up person. In some places, it's being able to take that first drink legally. I won't talk about the first drinks that were taken illegally. And as long as we're talking about driving, speaking as one who didn't learn to drive until he was 21, and I think I learned about 9 years too early, I'm all for moving the driving age back to 30 for everybody, judging by the driving behavior I see in the world. But what are the other monuments you might have that say you're becoming a grown-up? I think one of them is when you go either away to college or move out, and you have to take care of your day-to-day world. We did that with our youngest this year as he went off to college. It's ironically easier the second time because you know you're going to feel terrible. I mean, emotionally hard, but it was still terribly poignant for us and for him because now he was in charge of his day-to-day life. Now, mind you, he's in a college dormitory. It's a bit of a bassinet of another nature. But he has the capacity to get into serious trouble and he hasn't. I am very grateful for that. Moving out. Can you think of those moments for your life? Getting your first real job, the one where you have to show up every day and you have to work all day and you really have to earn it. You're not just, babysitting counts, I understand, mowing lawns, but at some point you have a boss and then you have to toe a certain line. That's a moment when you have to become a grown-up. But the one I want to point to, the one that I think we all wrestle with, look forward to, struggle with, falling in love. Now, we start that when we're teenagers, of course, with crushes and other things like that. I'm talking about when you reach that moment in life when you realize you have to decide if you're going to make a commitment to another person and who that person might be. Now, the fact that 50% of people who make that decision eventually divorce tells us that we're not automatically good at it. But I'm not talking about skills here. I'm talking about the longing, the sense that somehow we should be connected to another person in a deep, long, and lasting way. Because as many times as we've tried different forms, whether it be with the Big Love folks out there in Utah with their multiple wives, whether it was communes or open marriages, we always fall back to boring old monogamy. And as bad as we are at it, we seem to be better at that than everything else. I'm not here to talk about marriage, though. I'm talking about intimacy, because this is where the psychologist, and yes, I will mention a psychologist, Erik Erikson, he says that the moment we start looking for that intimate relationship, that deep, lasting relationship, when we are committed to finding it and being in one, that is the cusp of true adulthood, not the driving, not the working, not the moving out. It's when we begin to ask, who am I to another person who is not my family? When you begin to reach for another person, even if you don't know who that is, look for, and conversely, become receptive to another person. I want to talk about intimacy, because that's something adults can do, the adults as opposed to children. Because intimacy is about revealing yourself to someone not in your family in ways that entail risk. Remember what we said this morning? To reach out for another is to risk exposing oneself. There is danger here, because the person to whom you expose yourself emotionally or personally, well, they may not like you. Or they may not want you to be that close, and you can be rejected. I'm a man who only ever went on 2 dates. One of them was so profoundly unpleasant and awkward that it took me years to go on the next one. And I only ever made one pass at one woman, the one I'm married to. She said yes, and I said I could stop right here. And I did. So I know that intimacy, baring yourself to another person, opening yourself to being judged by another human being, is terrifying.